Okay, welcome back. I'm going to go through the slide reaction questions now. If you remember on these questions, you don't have to know the work, you just have to be able to say something about it. So in this particular case, all you need to say is that it is a photograph. It is a piece that you might know. We have talked about it in class before by Richard Avedon. We have talked about it in terms of its use of negative space and negative shapes, like this particular beautiful negative shape. And so that might be something else that you might discuss. You might happen to notice that it is an example of fashion photography. You might notice that it is a form of fashion photography that's about a particular time period, and that even though it was photographed in the 90s, it's very much sort of a recreation of the aesthetic of the mid-60s. Okay, so once again, if you nothing else, you should at least be able to note that this is a form of ceramics. If you were paying attention, you probably could tell by some of the details that this is a form of stoneware. And I'm leaving you the information, but you wouldn't necessarily be able to remember that. We did see this piece once in one of the lectures, but since I didn't ask you to study it, you wouldn't necessarily know it. You could also talk about the glaze painting and how it's kind of loose and expressive, kind of calligraphic. And you could talk about how the form is, the main form that we discussed a lot in this class is the amphora. So you could discuss in what way similar or dissimilar from it, right? It's similar-ish in that it has a narrow neck, but it's dissimilar in that it doesn't have handles. Handles are attached to the neck. It's not wider at the shoulder, it's more wider at the belly. So in more ways dissimilar from an amphora than similar. So probably the most important thing that you would, even if you didn't remember this piece, although we've talked about it a number of times, but even if you didn't remember it, you probably would remember that it is from printmaking. This particular print by Dürer, who is a master of many printmaking forms, but this particular one is an engraving. I have mentioned multiple times that we can see Dürer's signature, Albrecht AD right there, Albrecht Dürer, and 1513 right there on the print. So just in case you wanted to add some extra information. And we have talked about this in terms of how it creates value. The value is created through the repetition of all of these linear marks. There is no actual tone here. All the tone is created by thin repeating lines that are mostly kind of cross contour lines that move across forms. We've also talked about its organization of value, how it's primarily in kind of mid values with a few kind of spots, moments where there's very, very light areas of value and spots where there's high contrast. If you were looking through your notes, you probably saw that this one in one of my lectures is attributed to Pontormo, but I did some research and I double checked, and this is actually a Bronzino drawing, and it is generally attributed, although there's some debate about this, it's attributed as a portrait of Pontormo. And many people noted also that you can see his hand in two different positions, both his hand resting on the table and then his hand in this position. So that's kind of an interesting aspect of it. It's a drawing, and if nothing else, you should be able to recognize that. And this particular piece is a sculpture. You might be able to, by looking at it, figure out that it's a good example of additive and assemblage, like it's additive and constructive sculpture, right, where multiple pieces are added together. It's also kind of funny. It's called Green Demon, and it says hummus sucks behind it, which is somewhat amusing. And all right, that's the first 5. All right, in the next video, I'll get to the next 5.